The drilling platform's emergency alarm was screaming when I found Peterson hanging upside down in the equipment shaft, his safety harness still intact, but his body twisted in ways that defied every law of physics I knew. Blood dripped steadily from his mouth onto the metal grating below, forming a pool that reflected the flashing red lights. What made my hand shake wasn't the sight of his broken form. It was the expression of absolute terror frozen on his face, and the fact that every single bone in his body had been crushed from the inside out, like something had inflated him with pressure that no human frame could withstand. The worst part? Peterson had been standing right next to me in the control room just 5 minutes earlier, checking pressure readings on the North Sea drilling operation. 5 minutes. That's how long it took for something to grab him, drag him 30 feet through solid steel bulkheads, and turn his skeleton into powder, all without making a single sound that any of us heard over the routine noise of the platform. And now the same readings that Peterson had been monitoring were showing something impossible. The drill bit, which should have been cutting through sediment at 8,000 feet below the ocean floor, was registering contact with empty space. Not water, not rock, not oil, just void. A massive hollow chamber that stretched beyond the range of our deepest sensors, and according to the seismic data, it was starting to fill up with something that wasn't supposed to exist at those depths, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, back when I thought the worst thing that could happen on an oil rig was a blowout or equipment failure, back when I believed that the North Sea was just water and rock and the occasional fish, back when I had no idea that some things are buried beneath the ocean floor for very good reasons, and that drilling deep enough will eventually find them. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been working offshore drilling platforms for 12 years. Started as a roughneck stray 8,000 feet below the platform. Temperature, pressure, torque, weight on bit, rate of penetration, hundreds of variables that had to be monitored constantly to keep the operation safe and efficient. "How's our penetration rate?" I asked, checking the depth gauge. We were at 8,200 feet below the mud line, which put us roughly 1.5 miles beneath the actual ocean floor, steady at 40 feet per hour, Peterson replied, adjusting the mud pump flow rate. "Should hit our target depth by end of shift tomorrow if this formation holds up." The target depth was 9,000 feet, where Apex's geologists expected to find the oil reservoir that had justified this entire operation. Seismic surveys had indicated a significant hydrocarbon deposit trapped beneath a cap rock formation, exactly the kind of find that could justify the $1 million per day it cost to keep the Deepwater Monarch operational. I walked over to the geological monitoring station where Sarah Chen, our staff geologist, was analyzing rock samples from the latest core barrel. Sarah had joined us from the University of Edinburgh, young but sharp, with a PhD in petroleum geology and enough theoretical knowledge to complement our practical experience. "Anything interesting in the cores?" I asked. She held up a cylindrical section of rock about 3 inches in diameter. "Look at this limestone formation. See these fossils embedded in the matrix?" I leaned closer. The rock was gray-white limestone, but embedded throughout were small spiral shapes that looked almost like shells. "Ammonites?" That's what I thought at first. She placed the core under a magnifying glass. "But look closer. These spirals are too regular, too geometric. And see this mineral composition?" She pointed to darker veins running through the limestone. "I've never seen anything like it. It's almost like the rock formation grew around something artificial. Artificial how? I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking it." She set the core back on her workbench. "But these formations don't match anything in the geological surveys. According to our charts, we should be drilling through standard North Sea limestone. This looks more like limestone that formed around manufactured objects." I studied the core sample more carefully. The spiral patterns were unusually uniform, and the darker veins did have an almost metallic appearance. But after 12 years of looking at rock samples, you learn that geology can produce some pretty weird-looking natural formations. Keep documenting everything, I told Sarah. If we're drilling through something unexpected, Apex is going to want detailed analysis. The afternoon shift brought the first sign that something was genuinely wrong. Around 1400 hours, Peterson called me over to the drilling console with concern in his voice. "Jake, take a look at these pressure readings." The downhole pressure gauge was showing fluctuations that didn't make sense. The pressure should have been increasing steadily as we drilled deeper, but instead it was jumping around like we were hitting pockets of gas or encountering formation changes every few minutes. "Could be tool malfunction," I suggested. "When's the last time we calibrated the sensors?" "Yesterday morning. Everything checked out perfect." Peterson pulled up a pressure graph on his monitor. "But look at this pattern. See how the pressure spikes, then drops, then spikes again? It's almost like..." "Like what?" "Like something down there is breathing." I stared at the graph. The pressure variations were rhythmic, occurring roughly every 30 seconds. Spike, gradual decrease. Spike, gradual decrease. It did look almost biological, but that was impossible at these depths and pressures. "Circulation's good?" I asked, checking the mud return flow. "Perfect. Mud's coming back clean, no signs of gas or formation fluids." Peterson tapped the pressure gauge. "But Jake, there's something else. The bit weight is varying in sync with the pressure spikes, like the formation is getting harder and softer in rhythm." I called up the bit weight display on my console. Peterson was right. Every 30 seconds, the drill bit encountered resistance that required an additional 1,000 pounds of weight to maintain penetration. Then the resistance would ease, and the bit would practically fall through the formation until the next spike. "Let's pull cores more frequently," I decided. "If there's something unusual about this formation, Sarah needs to see it." Over the next 6 hours, we pulled core samples every 100 feet instead of our usual 500-foot intervals. Each sample showed the same unusual characteristics: limestone with embedded spiral patterns and metallic veins. But the patterns were becoming more complex, and the metallic content was increasing. By 2200 hours, Sarah was looking genuinely puzzled. "Jake, I need to show you something." She had arranged the latest core samples in chronological order on her workbench. "Look at the progression. These earliest samples from this morning show simple spiral patterns, but as we've gone deeper, the patterns have become more elaborate." I looked at the sequence. She was right. The spiral shapes had evolved from simple shells to complex geometric patterns that looked almost like writing. "These aren't fossils," Sarah said quietly. "At least, not like any fossils I've ever seen. They're too complex, too organized. It's like we're drilling through layers of, I don't know, some kind of record." "Record of what?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." She picked up the most recent core sample. "But Jake, there's something else. See this metallic material running through the limestone?" I ran it through the X-ray fluorescence analyzer. She showed me the readout. "It's not matching any known elemental composition. Contains traces of elements that shouldn't exist in nature." I studied the analysis data. Most of it was beyond my understanding, but I could see that several of the elemental signatures didn't match anything in the standard reference database. "Could be equipment malfunction," I suggested, though I was starting to get a feeling in my stomach that equipment function wasn't going to explain everything we were seeing. I ran the analysis 3 times on different samples. Same results. Sarah set the core back down. "Jake, I think we're drilling through something that was built, not something that formed naturally." Before I could respond, Peterson's voice crackled over the intercom. "Jake, to the drilling floor. We've got a situation." I found Peterson staring at his pressure monitors with a look of complete bewilderment. "Jake, the downhole pressure just disappeared." What do you mean disappeared?" "I mean, it went from 3,200 psi to 0 in about 10 seconds. He showed me the display. We're getting no pressure reading at all from the drill bit. I checked the mud return flow. Still normal. No signs of lost circulation. Tool failure? That's what I thought. But look at this. Peterson pulled up the weight indicator. Drill string is still showing normal weight. If the bottom hole assembly had failed, we'd see a weight loss. So what's causing zero pressure? Only thing I can think of is that we've drilled into a void. Like an underwater cave or something. I thought about what Sarah had told me about the core samples. Artificial patterns, unknown metallic elements, formations that looked like they'd grown around manufactured objects. And now we'd apparently drilled into empty space, 8,000 feet below the seafloor. Stop drilling, I ordered. Pull the string up 50 feet and let's see if we can re-establish bottom contact. Peterson activated the drawworks, lifting the entire drill string. At 8,150 feet, the pressure gauge flickered back to life, showing normal formation pressure. We had bottom contact again, so there's definitely a void at 8,200 feet. Peterson confirmed. Question is, how big is it? We spent the next hour lowering and raising the drill string, mapping the extent of the empty space. What we found made no geological sense. The void stretched at least 200 feet in diameter and over 100 feet in vertical height. It was like we discovered a massive underwater cathedral buried beneath 1.5 miles of rock and sediment. This doesn't match anything in the seismic data, I told Sarah when she joined us on the drilling floor. According to the surveys, this should be solid limestone formation all the way to target depth. Sarah looked at the pressure and weight readings we'd recorded. Jake, caves don't form in limestone at these depths. The pressure would collapse any natural void space. So, what are we looking at? I don't know. But based on the core samples and now this void, I think we found something that was buried here intentionally. The implication hung in the air between us. Something buried intentionally beneath 1.5 miles of ocean floor, surrounded by limestone formations that contained artificial patterns and unknown metallic elements. Something that had been designed to stay hidden. We need to report this to Apex, I said finally. But when Peterson tried to establish satellite communication with our operations base in Aberdeen, the equipment wouldn't function properly. We were getting massive interference across all frequencies, like something was jamming our transmissions. Could be the storm, Peterson suggested. Though the weather had been calm for hours. Keep trying, I told him. Management needs to know about this void before we continue drilling. At 0200 hours, I was conducting the routine night inspection when I heard the first sound. It was subtle at first, almost lost in the constant noise of the platform's generators and pumps. A low-frequency vibration that seemed to come from below, transmitted up through the steel structure of the rig. I paused near the moon pool, the opening in the center of the platform where our drill string descended through the ocean toward the seafloor. The sound was clearer here. Not mechanical like our equipment, but organic, rhythmic, like something very large was breathing 8,000 feet below us. I grabbed my radio. Peterson, you monitoring downhole sensors? His voice crackled back through static. Yeah. Why? You hearing something? Come to the moon pool. Bring Sarah. 5 minutes later, the three of us stood listening to the sound that was definitely coming from below. It was clearer now, a deep, resonant tone that pulsed every 30 seconds. The same rhythm we'd observed in the pressure variations earlier. That's not equipment, Sarah said quietly. Peterson was checking his sensor readings. Downhole pressure is spiking in sync with that sound. Whatever's making the noise, it's affecting conditions at the drill bit. How is that possible? I asked. We're 8,000 feet down. Sound travels through rock, Sarah replied. But for us to hear it up here, whatever's making that noise would have to be extremely loud. The sound intensified, and I felt the platform vibrate slightly under our feet. Not the familiar vibration of our equipment, but something new. something that made my teeth ache. "Jake," Peterson said, his voice tight with concern. "I'm showing massive pressure fluctuations across all downhole sensors, and the seismic monitors are going crazy." I followed him to the sensor station. The seismic display looked like it was recording an earthquake, but the epicenter appeared to be directly below our drill site, and the pressure readings were showing variations that defied explanation. "It's like something down there is moving around," Peterson said. "Something big enough to change the geological pressure over a wide area." The breathing sound stopped abruptly. The platform fell silent except for our normal operational noise. But on the seismic display, we could see activity increasing instead of decreasing, whatever was down there. The silence didn't mean it had gone away. "I'm pulling the drill string," I decided. "We need to get our equipment out of that void before we figure out what's happening." Peterson activated the drawworks, beginning the slow process of retrieving 8,000 feet of drill pipe. It would take at least 2 hours to get the entire string back to the surface. Assuming nothing went wrong, that's when the power fluctuations started. At 0240 hours, the platform's main generators began cycling erratically. The lights would dim, brighten, dim again in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. Our drilling equipment continued to function, but every electrical system on the rig was experiencing intermittent power variations. "Could be equipment failure," our electrician, Rodriguez, reported over the radio. "But I'm not finding any faults in the power distribution system." The breathing sound resumed, louder than before. This time it was accompanied by something else. A low-frequency hum that made the steel deck plates resonate under our feet. The sound was coming from multiple directions now, not just from directly below the platform. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Jake, look at the water." I looked over the side of the platform. The ocean's surface, which had been relatively calm, was beginning to show unusual wave patterns. Not regular swells from wind or current, but circular ripples spreading outward from points around the rig, like something very large was moving underwater in multiple locations. "How many things are down there?" Peterson asked, studying the seismic displays. The monitors showed activity in a rough circle around our position. At least 6 separate epicenters of movement, each one creating pressure waves that reached the surface as those circular ripple patterns. "This doesn't make sense," Sarah said, her voice strained. "Nothing that large could survive at those pressures. Nothing biological. Anyway, the drill string had been retrieved to 6,000 feet when the first equipment failure occurred. The mud pumps, which had been circulating drilling fluid down the hole and back to the surface, suddenly lost prime. Not a mechanical failure, but like something had physically blocked the flow of fluid. "Jake, I'm showing 0 mud return," Peterson reported. "Pumps are running, but nothing's coming back up the annulus." I checked the mud pit levels. We were losing drilling fluid at a rate that suggested massive losses downhole. Could be lost circulation into the formation. At 6,000 feet? That formation tested solid just yesterday. The platform shuddered, not from wave action, but from something that felt like impact from below. Emergency alarms began sounding as our dynamic positioning system struggled to maintain station. "Bridge, this is drilling. What's our position status?" The bridge responded immediately. "Drilling. We're holding station, but we're fighting something. GPS shows us drifting, but compass heading is steady, like something's pushing us from below." Another impact, harder this time. The platform tilted slightly to starboard before the positioning thrusters corrected, but through the steel structure, I could feel vibrations that weren't coming from our equipment or the ocean's surface. "Continue pulling the string," I ordered Peterson. "Whatever's down there, I want our equipment back on deck." At 4,000 feet of retrieval, the breathing sound changed. Instead of the rhythmic pulsing we'd been hearing, it became constant. A deep, sustained tone that made the entire platform resonate like a tuning fork. And mixed with it, for just a moment, I could swear I heard something that sounded almost like voices, not human voices. Too deep, too resonant, but definitely structured sounds, like communication of some kind. Sarah had gone pale. Jake, I need to tell you something about those core samples. What about them? I've been running more detailed analysis while you've been pulling the string. Those spiral patterns? They're not random. They're mathematical, geometric progressions, prime number sequences, complex equations that... She was interrupted by Peterson's shout from the drilling console. Jake! Emergency stop. The string stuck. I ran to the Drawworks controls. The drill string, which had been coming up smoothly, was now locked solid at 4,000 feet. The Drawworks motor was straining against the load, but the string wouldn't budge. How much weight are we showing? I asked. Nominal string weight, plus about 50,000 pounds of overpull. Peterson replied, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold air. It's like something grabbed the bottom hole assembly and won't let go. We tried every standard technique for freeing stuck pipe, rotating the string while pulling, jarring operations to shock the pipe loose, circulating fluid to lubricate the wellbore. Nothing worked. Whatever had caught our drill string at 4,000 feet had a grip that our equipment couldn't break. Bridge, this is drilling. I called on the radio. We need to move position. Can you offset us 50 feet to the east? Roger. Drilling. Beginning positioning maneuver. The platform's thrusters fired, attempting to move us laterally while maintaining the same water depth. But as we began to move, the resistance on the drill string increased dramatically. Whatever was holding our equipment was strong enough to resist the positioning system of a semi-submersible drilling rig. Movement stopped, the bridge reported. We can't offset against the resistance. That's when I realized the truth. We weren't stuck on something. Something was holding us deliberately, preventing us from leaving the area above the void we drilled into. Peterson, I said quietly. How much drilling fluid did we lose down that hole? He checked his mud book. About 300 barrels since we hit the void. Where did it go? I assumed lost circulation into the formation, but... He paused, understanding the implication. If there's a void down there, the fluid would collect in the chamber, 300 barrels. That's over 12,000 gallons of drilling mud containing chemical additives, weighting agents, and lubricants. I thought about Sarah's analysis of the core samples, mathematical patterns, artificial formations, unknown metallic elements. What if we just poisoned something that's been sleeping down there for a very long time? The breathing sound stopped again, but this time, the silence felt different. Not like something going dormant, but like something preparing to act. At 05:15 hours, Rodriguez came running onto the drilling floor with terror in his eyes. Jake, you need to see this. Peterson's. I followed him to the equipment shaft where we'd been routing new electrical cables the previous day. The shaft was a narrow vertical space that ran from the main deck down to the lower equipment rooms, barely wide enough for a person to work in. That's where we found Peterson, hanging upside down, his safety harness still clipped to his anchor point, but his body impossible twisted. Every bone seemed to be broken, but there was no sign of impact damage. No blood, except what was dripping from his mouth. It was like he'd been crushed by pressure that came from inside his own body. How long has he been here? I asked Rodriguez, though I knew the answer would make no sense. He can't have been here long. I saw him at the drilling console 5 minutes ago. That was impossible. I'd seen Peterson at the console too, checking the mud pump status while I'd been talking to the bridge about changing position. But here he was, dead for what had to be hours based on the amount of blood that had pooled below him. Sarah appeared in the equipment shaft entrance, took one look at Peterson's body, and backed away quickly. Jake, that's not from any kind of accident. She was right. No equipment failure or industrial accident could produce injuries like Peterson's. His limbs were bent in directions that defied anatomy, but there were no cuts, no external trauma. It was like something had reached inside his body and rearranged his skeleton without breaking the skin. "We need to evacuate the platform," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Emergency procedures. Get everyone to the lifeboats." But when I tried to activate the general alarm, the system didn't respond. The emergency communication network was completely dead. Rodriguez tried the backup systems with the same result. "Jake," Sarah said quietly, "look at Peterson's face." I looked, though I didn't want to. Peterson's expression was frozen in absolute terror, his eyes wide and staring. But it wasn't just fear of death. It was the look of someone who had seen something that wasn't supposed to exist. The platform shuddered again, more violently than before. This time the impact came from multiple directions simultaneously, like we were being hit by several massive objects at once. The emergency lighting flickered on as the main power grid fluctuated. "How many crew on board?" I asked Rodriguez. 12 including us. But I haven't seen anyone else since the power started acting up. We should have been hearing people moving around, responding to the power fluctuations and the impacts against the platform. The normal sounds of a crew dealing with equipment problems. Instead, the Deepwater Monarch felt eerily quiet despite the mechanical noise of the generators and pumps. "We need to find the rest of the crew," I decided. We started with the accommodations module, checking each cabin. Empty. Personal gear still in place. Beds unmade like people had left in a hurry, but no signs of struggle or disturbance. It was like 11 people had simply vanished from the platform. The galley was the same. Coffee still warm in the pots, half-eaten meals on the tables, but no crew members. In the recreation room, a poker game was laid out mid-hand, chips and cards scattered as if the players had suddenly abandoned their game. "This isn't possible," Rodriguez whispered. "Where did everyone go?" We checked the engine room, the control rooms, the maintenance workshops. Everywhere showed signs of recent activity, but no people. The platform was running on automated systems, but the human crew had disappeared. That's when we heard the voices, not from anywhere on the platform, but from below, transmitted up through the steel structure like the breathing sounds had been earlier. Human voices, but distant and distorted, like they were coming from a great depth. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Jake, those sound like our missing crew members," I finished. The voices were clearer now. Definitely human. Definitely familiar. I could make out Rodriguez's voice, and Williams from the engine room, and Captain Larson from the bridge. But they were coming from below the platform, from the direction of the void we drilled into. "That's impossible," Rodriguez said, but I could see the recognition on his face too. "I'm right here. That can't be my voice." But it was. Rodriguez's voice, along with the others calling up from 8,000 feet below the ocean floor, calling for help, pleading to be brought back to the surface. The drill string, which had been stuck at 4,000 feet, suddenly began moving. Not up, but down. The drawworks was running in reverse, feeding pipe back into the hole despite the fact that no one was operating the controls. "Rodriguez, shut down the drawworks," I shouted. He ran to the control panel, but the emergency stop wouldn't engage. The system was running automatically, controlled by something other than our normal operating procedures. The drill string continued descending, taking our equipment deeper into whatever was waiting in that void. Sarah was staring at the drawworks display. "Jake, look at the depth reading." The string was already past 6,000 feet and descending rapidly, but according to our measurements, the void started at 8,200 feet. The equipment should still be in solid formation, unless the void is growing, Sarah said quietly. "Unless whatever's down there is expanding the chamber." The voices from below grew louder, more urgent. Now I could hear Peterson among them, calling my name, asking why we'd left him down there. But Peterson was hanging dead in the equipment shaft 30 feet away from where we stood. "We need to get off this platform," I said. "Right now." The breathing sound resumed, but different than before. Instead of the rhythmic pulsing, it was rapid and irregular, like something in distress or excited, and mixed with the breathing were other sounds, scraping noises, like massive objects dragging against rock, movement sounds, like something very large pulling itself through confined spaces. The platform tilted sharply to starboard as something struck us from below. This time the impact was powerful enough to trigger alarms throughout the rig. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows as the normal electrical systems fluctuated. "Lifeboats," I ordered. "Whatever's happening here, we can't stop it." But when we reached the lifeboat stations, we found the boats had been damaged, not by weather or equipment failure, but deliberately sabotaged. The hulls had been punctured by something sharp and strong enough to penetrate fiberglass and aluminum. Deep gouges that looked almost like claw marks. "Someone doesn't want us to leave," Rodriguez said, running his hands over the damage. The emergency radio equipment had been similarly destroyed, smashed beyond repair with the same deliberate thoroughness. Whatever was happening on the Deepwater Monarch, we were cut off from any possibility of rescue or evacuation. Sarah was examining the claw marks in the lifeboat hull. "Jake, look at the spacing of these gouges. Look at the depth." The marks were roughly 18 inches apart and penetrated nearly 6 inches into the composite hull material. Whatever had made them possessed both the intelligence to sabotage our escape route and the physical capability to tear through materials designed to withstand North Sea conditions. "How long can the platform maintain position without crew?" I asked Rodriguez. "Dynamic positioning is fully automated. Could run for weeks as long as the thrusters and generators keep functioning. But Jake," he pointed toward the moon pool, "look at the drill string." The string was still descending automatically. We were now showing 9,000 feet of pipe in the hole, which meant our equipment was 1,000 feet below the void we'd originally detected. But the drawworks continued feeding pipe into the wellbore like it was following some predetermined program. 9,500 feet. Sarah read from the display. 10,000. "Jake, where is our equipment going?" The voices from below were getting louder, more insistent. But now they weren't just calling for help. They were giving us instructions, telling us to come down, to join them in the deep chamber where everything would be explained. The voices of our missing crew members, promising that everything would make sense if we just followed them into the depths. "Don't listen to them," I told Rodriguez and Sarah, though part of me was curious about what was really happening down there. At 10,500 feet, the drawworks finally stopped. The drill string had reached bottom in whatever lay beneath the original void, and immediately, the platform began to vibrate with a new rhythm. Not the breathing sounds we'd been hearing, but something that felt almost like machinery. "Jake," Sarah whispered, "I think we woke something up. Something that's been waiting down there for a very long time." The ocean around the platform began to change. The water, which had been its normal dark blue-green color, was turning black. Not like oil or contamination, but genuinely black, like it was absorbing light instead of reflecting it. And the black water was spreading outward from our position in a perfect circle. The drilling mud, I realized. 300 barrels of chemical-laden fluid. What if it wasn't just poisoning whatever's down there? What if it was feeding it? The voices from below stopped abruptly, but the mechanical sounds continued, growing louder and more complex, like massive gears engaging, or enormous pumps starting up after centuries of dormancy. Rodriguez grabbed my arm. "Jake, the platform's moving." He was right. Not drifting due to current or wind, but moving with purpose. The dynamic positioning system showed us maintaining station, but I could feel acceleration through the deck plates. We were being pulled downward, toward whatever was waiting in that deep chamber. The drill string, Sarah said, understanding. It's not stuck anymore. Something's pulling us down using our own equipment as a cable. I ran to the Drawworks controls, trying to activate the emergency disconnect that would separate the platform from the drill string. But the controls didn't respond. The system had been locked out, controlled by something other than our manual inputs. The breathing sounds resumed, but now they were coming from all directions. Not just from below, but from the water around the platform. Multiple sources, like we were surrounded by things that had risen from the depths to investigate what we'd awakened. Jake, Rodriguez said quietly, look at the moon pool. The opening in the center of the platform, where our drill string descended into the ocean, was beginning to glow. Not reflected light from our work lamps, but actual illumination coming from below. Green-white light that pulsed in rhythm with the breathing sounds. And in that light, I could see shapes moving in the water. Massive forms that undulated through the black ocean like they were swimming through air instead of liquid. Things that were too large and moved in ways that defied everything I knew about marine biology. We're not dealing with equipment failure, I said, finally accepting what my rational mind had been refusing to acknowledge. We're dealing with something that was buried under the ocean floor for a reason. The platform continued its descent, pulled down by whatever was controlling our drill string. The water level was rising around the deck as we were dragged beneath the surface of the North Sea. Emergency systems activated automatically, sealing critical areas and switching to internal air supplies. How long can we survive submerged? Sarah asked. The platform wasn't designed for complete submersion, Rodriguez replied. Maybe an hour before we lose hull integrity. But as the black water closed over the deck, I could see through the windows that we weren't sinking randomly. We were being guided downward with precision, following a path that avoided the platform's structural weak points. Whatever was controlling our descent understood our equipment well enough to keep us intact during the journey to the bottom. The pressure sensors began registering depth as we descended past the normal operating limits of a semi-submersible rig. 100 feet below the surface, 200, 500. The hull was groaning under the increasing water pressure, but somehow holding together through the observation windows. The green-white glow was getting brighter, and in that light, I could see structures on the ocean floor that didn't appear on any geological survey. Geometric shapes that rose from the sediment like buildings, connected by what looked like roads or pathways. An entire city buried beneath the North Sea, illuminated by the same bioluminescent glow that was coming from the creatures around us. Jake, Sarah said, her voice barely audible. I think we found what happened to the missing crew. She was looking out a starboard window, pointing toward one of the illuminated structures below, and there, moving among the geometric buildings, I could see human figures. Tiny at this distance, but definitely human, walking purposefully through what could only be described as an underwater city. That's not possible, Rodriguez whispered. Humans can't survive at these pressures without atmospheric suits, but there they were. And as we descended closer, I could see that some of the figures were wearing the orange coveralls that were standard issue for our crew. Our missing team members, alive and active, 8,000 feet below the ocean's surface, in an environment that should have killed them instantly. The platform settled onto what appeared to be a landing area specifically designed for our equipment, massive stone supports that aligned perfectly with our hull structure, like the entire operation had been planned in advance. The Drawworks automatically began paying out the drill string, lowering our equipment into a cylindrical opening that had been carved into the ocean floor with mathematical precision. We're not the first, I realized, looking around at the structures surrounding us. Look at those support platforms. Those are designed for different types of drilling equipment. Other rigs, other operations. Sarah pointed toward a cluster of structures about a mile away. "Jake, those look like ships. Surface vessels that were brought down the same way we were." She was right. Through the green-white illumination, I could see the outlines of what appeared to be cargo ships, tankers, even what looked like naval vessels, all arranged in precise formations around the central city structures. A collection of surface craft that had been brought down over decades, maybe centuries, to serve whatever purpose this underwater civilization required. The pressure equalization system activated automatically as our hull settled into the stone supports. Somehow, impossibly, the platform was maintaining structural integrity at a depth that should have crushed us like an empty soda can. The atmospheric pressure inside remained normal, while outside the windows I could see we were surrounded by millions of tons of water. "This is impossible," Rodriguez said, checking the pressure gauges. "We're showing normal internal atmosphere, but we have to be at least 2,000 feet down." Sarah was studying the structures outside. "Not impossible if someone designed this place to accommodate surface vessels. Look at how precisely our platform fits these supports. This landing area was built specifically for drilling rigs." Movement caught my eye through the forward observation window. Human figures approaching across the illuminated pathways between the geometric buildings. They moved with purpose but without urgency, like they had all the time in the world to reach us. "Jake," Rodriguez whispered. "That's Captain Larson." He was right. Leading the group of figures was Captain Larson, still wearing his orange coveralls, walking calmly across the ocean floor like he was strolling across the platform deck. Behind him, I could see Williams, Martinez, Thompson, and the rest of our missing crew members. "They look normal," Sarah said, though her voice carried doubt. They did look normal, at least from a distance. No signs of pressure suits or breathing apparatus, no indication that they were struggling with the impossible environment they were walking through. But as they got closer, I could see that something was wrong with their movements. Too fluid, too coordinated, like they were moving in formation rather than as individuals. The breathing sounds had stopped completely now, replaced by a different kind of sound. Mechanical noises, but organic at the same time, like massive biological machinery operating in the depths around us. And the green-white glow was getting brighter, illuminating details of the underwater city that made my rational mind rebel against what I was seeing. The buildings weren't built from stone or metal. They were grown, like coral formations, but in geometric patterns that spoke of intelligent design. Spirals and angles that matched the patterns Sarah had found in the drill cores. Mathematical structures that had been created by something that understood advanced engineering principles. "Jake," Sarah said quietly, "those aren't buildings. They're organisms. Living architecture." She was right. As I watched, some of the geometric structures were moving slowly, growing and changing shape with the same rhythm as the breathing sounds we'd been hearing. The entire city was alive, a massive organism that had created itself in patterns that happened to be useful for its purposes. Captain Larson reached the hull of our platform and looked up at the observation windows where we stood. His face was pale in the green light, and his eyes had a quality I'd never seen before. Not exactly lifeless, but distant, like he was looking at us from very far away. He raised his hand and gestured toward an airlock that I hadn't noticed before, a circular opening in the living architecture that aligned perfectly with our emergency airlock system. Someone, or something, wanted us to come outside. "We're not opening that airlock," I said firmly. "Whatever's happened to the crew, we can't help them by joining them." But even as I said it, I could feel the pull. The same curiosity that had kept us drilling when we should have stopped. The need to understand what we'd discovered, what we'd awakened from its ancient sleep beneath the ocean floor. Rodriguez was checking the airlock controls. "Jake, the system's cycling automatically. Someone's activating the sequence from outside. The outer airlock door was opening, creating a connection between our platform and the living architecture of the underwater city. Through the transparent aluminum window, I could see that the airlock was filled with the same green-white glow that illuminated everything else down here. The atmospheric pressure in that airlock is reading normal, Rodriguez reported, his voice filled with wonder. How is that possible at this depth? Sarah was studying the readouts. The entire city must be pressurized, or maybe pressure works differently here. Maybe the normal laws of physics don't apply in this place. Captain Larson was still standing outside, waiting patiently for us to join him. Other crew members had arranged themselves in a semicircle around the airlock, all of them wearing the same distant expression, all of them moving with that same fluid coordination. The inner airlock door began to cycle open. Override the system, I ordered Rodriguez. Manual lockdown, emergency protocols, but the controls weren't responding to our input. The airlock system was being operated by something else, something that had access to our equipment in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Jake, Sarah said, pointing toward the moon pool area where our drill string disappeared into the ocean floor. Look at the pipe. The drill string wasn't just hanging in the hole anymore. It was connected to something, integrated into the living architecture like it had become part of the city's circulatory system. Our equipment, our connection to the surface world, had been absorbed into whatever this place was. The inner airlock door opened completely, and the green-white glow spilled into our platform. But instead of water rushing in, there was air. Breathable atmosphere that carried scents I'd never experienced before. Ozone and metal and something organic that wasn't quite plant and wasn't quite animal. Captain Larson stepped through the airlock, his movements still too fluid, too coordinated. When he spoke, his voice sounded normal, but there was something underneath it, an echo, like someone else was speaking at the same time. "Jake," he said, and his familiar voice made me want to trust him despite everything I'd seen. "You need to come with us. There's something you have to understand about what you found down here. Captain, what happened to you? Where have you been for the past 6 hours?" Larson smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Time works differently here, Jake. We've been here much longer than 6 hours, long enough to understand what this place is, what it's been waiting for." Rodriguez stepped forward. "Captain, we need to evacuate the platform. There's been incidents. Peterson's dead." "Peterson's not dead," Larson replied calmly. "He's here, just like the rest of us. Just like you'll be once you understand." Through the airlock, I could see more figures approaching. Not just our missing crew members, but others. People wearing clothing from different eras, different types of work gear. Crews from the other ships and platforms that had been brought down to this underwater city over the years. "How many ships have been taken?" Sarah asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. "All of them, eventually," Larson replied. "Everyone who drills deep enough, who finds the chambers, who wakes the Guardians, they all come here to join the work." "What work?" Larson gestured toward the living architecture surrounding us. "The construction, the preparation. This city has been growing for thousands of years, waiting for the surface world to develop the technology it needs." "Technology for what?" "For the return," Larson said simply. "The Deep Ones have been patient, Jake. They've waited while the surface dwellers evolved, while they developed drilling technology and underwater engineering, waited for the right moment to reclaim what was always theirs." The green-white glow was getting brighter, and I could see movement in the water beyond the city structures. Massive shapes that dwarfed even the largest buildings. Things that had been sleeping in the deep trenches, awakened by our drilling operations and the chemical contamination we'd introduced into their domain. The drilling mud, I realized. It wasn't poison. It was... what? Food? Medicine? Catalyst. Sarah said quietly. We gave them what they needed to complete their preparation. Larson nodded approvingly. Dr. Chen understands. The compounds in your drilling fluid were the final components needed to activate the deep chambers, to wake the Guardians fully and begin the ascent. Ascent to where? To the surface, Jake. To reclaim the oceans that were theirs before continents rose from the seafloor. Larson stepped closer, and I could see that his eyes weren't quite the right color anymore. Still brown, but with flecks of green-white that pulsed in rhythm with the city's glow. The surface world has had its time. Now it's our turn. Rodriguez was backing toward the far bulkhead, looking for another way out of the airlock area. But there was nowhere to go. The platform was completely surrounded by the living architecture, integrated into the city's structure in a way that made escape impossible. You don't have to be afraid, Larson continued, his voice taking on that hypnotic quality I'd noticed in the voices calling from below. The transition is enlightening. You'll understand things about the deep ocean that surface science has never dreamed of. What about the people on the surface? Sarah asked. What happens to them when these deep ones return? Larson's expression didn't change. They'll adapt, or they won't. Evolution has always been about survival of the most suitable forms. Humanity's time as the dominant species is ending. The platform shuddered again, but this time it wasn't from external impacts. Something was happening to the structure itself. The metal walls were beginning to show the same spiral patterns we'd seen in the drill cores. The living architecture was spreading, integrating our equipment into the city's organic matrix. The platform is being absorbed, Rodriguez whispered, running his hand along a wall where metal was slowly transforming into the same coral-like substance that made up the city structures. Not absorbed, Larson corrected. Improved, enhanced, made into something that can survive what's coming. I watched in horrified fascination as our familiar equipment began to change. The steel deck plates were developing the same bioluminescent properties as the city architecture. The control panels were growing organic interfaces that pulsed with information in languages that didn't use words or symbols. Jake, Sarah said urgently. We have to get out of here before the transformation completes. But where could we go? We were 2,000 feet below the ocean surface, surrounded by an alien city, with our equipment being absorbed into a biological matrix we didn't understand. The only escape route was the way we'd come down, through 8,000 feet of water pressure that would kill us instantly. That's when I remembered the emergency ascent protocol. Every deep-sea platform carried emergency escape pods designed to reach the surface even from extreme depths. They were stored in the lower deck, just below where we were standing. Rodriguez, the emergency pods, are they still intact? He checked a control panel that was still partially human technology. 2 pods showing ready status. But Jake, they're designed for 600 feet maximum depth, not 2,000. Better chance than staying here and becoming part of the city. Larson seemed to sense what we were planning. His expression shifted, becoming less human and more something else. Jake, you don't understand the consequences of returning to the surface. The deep ones are already rising. The first wave will reach the shallow water within hours. First wave of what? The reclamation force. Every deep trench in every ocean is releasing its guardians. Your drilling operations weren't isolated to this location. Apex Energy has wells all over the world, and they've all broken through into the deep chambers. The implication hit me like a physical blow. If we'd awakened something here by drilling into that void, and if Apex had similar operations in other locations, how many drilling sites? 47 active deep water operations, Sarah said quietly, her face pale with understanding. If each one has breached a chamber like this one, then the deep ones are rising simultaneously from trenches across the entire planet. Larson finished. The surface world has perhaps 6 hours before the first Guardians reach the continental shelves. Through the observation windows, I could see the massive shapes moving in the distance. Things that made the city structures look small by comparison. Ancient creatures that had been waiting beneath the ocean floor for the right moment to reclaim their domain. That's why we need you here, Larson continued. Humanity will need representatives who understand what's happening, people who can help the surface dwellers adapt to the new reality. Or we can warn them, I said, moving toward the corridor that led to the emergency pod storage. Warn them of what? That evolution is continuing? That the oceans are returning to their original inhabitants? Larson's voice was taking on harmonics that made my teeth ache. Jake, you've seen the power of the Deep Ones. You've seen their technology, their organization. Resistance will only cause unnecessary suffering. Rodriguez and Sarah followed me toward the lower deck, while Larson and the other transformed crew members made no move to stop us. Maybe they were confident that we couldn't escape, or maybe they wanted us to reach the surface to serve as witnesses to what was coming. The emergency pod storage was in the lower equipment deck, in a section of the platform that hadn't yet begun its transformation to living architecture. The pods themselves were simple but effective, pressurized spheres designed to rocket to the surface using explosive decompression, with enough life support for 12 hours in emergency communication equipment. 2 pods, 3 people, Rodriguez observed. You and Sarah take 1 pod, I decided. I'll take the second. Jake, we should stay together. If something goes wrong with 1 pod, the other might still make it to the surface. I was already climbing into the first pod, running through the activation checklist I'd memorized during countless safety drills. Get to the surface, contact the authorities, warn them about what's coming. The pod launch sequence was automated once initiated. Explosive charges would blow the pod clear of the platform, while built-in buoyancy systems would rocket it toward the surface faster than the water pressure could crush the occupants. Sarah grabbed my arm before I could close the pod hatch. Jake, what if Larson is right? What if this is just evolution continuing? Then we'll deal with it from the surface, I replied. But I'm not giving up on humanity without a fight. The pod launch was like being shot from a cannon. Explosive acceleration followed by the sensation of racing upward through water that got lighter and warmer as we approached the surface. The pressure readings on my pod's display showed rapid decompression as we rose from the depths where no human should have been able to survive. 2,000 feet, 1,500, 1,000. The water outside the small porthole was getting brighter, changing from the deep black of the abyss to the dark blue of the open ocean. I could see Rodriguez and Sarah's pod rising parallel to mine, both of us racing toward a surface that seemed impossibly far above. At 500 feet, I got my first glimpse of what Larson had meant about the Guardians rising. The ocean around our ascent path was full of movement. Massive shapes ascending from deeper trenches, things that made the creatures around the underwater city look small by comparison. They moved with the same fluid coordination I'd seen in the transformed crew members, but on a scale that defied comprehension. The largest of them had to be over 1,000 feet long, undulating through the water like enormous serpents made of living darkness. But they weren't just animals. I could see structures along their bodies, geometric patterns that suggested technology integrated into their biological forms, living ships, or perhaps creatures that had been enhanced with artificial capabilities. At 200 feet, the first of the Guardians reached the depth where our pods were ascending. One of them, smaller than the giants but still easily the size of a cargo ship, turned toward us with movements that were definitely intelligent and curious. It approached Rodriguez and Sarah's pod first, surrounding it with appendages that looked almost like arms. For a moment, I thought it was going to crush the pod or drag it back down to the depths. Instead, it seemed to examine the escape vehicle with the same clinical interest a scientist might show in studying an interesting specimen. Then it released the pod and turned toward mine. Up close, the creature was even more impossible than it had appeared from a distance. Its body was translucent, allowing me to see internal structures that pulsed with the same green-white light as the underwater city. But mixed with the organic components were clearly artificial elements, metal frameworks, electronic interfaces, mechanical systems that had been grown into rather than built onto the creature's body. It studied my pod for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then, impossibly, it spoke. Not with vocal cords, but directly into my mind, using concepts rather than words. Surface dweller. You have seen the deep city. You understand the awakening. The mental voice was vast and ancient, carrying knowledge that stretched back geological ages. Your species has served its purpose. The preparation phase is complete. I tried to respond, to argue, to plead for humanity's survival, but the creature was already losing interest in me, turning its attention toward the surface where other guardians were beginning to emerge into the upper water layers. Tell them, the voice continued as the creature began to swim away. Tell the surface dwellers that resistance will bring suffering. Cooperation will bring transformation. My pod broke the surface of the North Sea in the middle of the worst storm I'd ever seen. Not a natural storm, but something created by the massive disturbances as hundreds of deep-sea creatures rose simultaneously from ocean trenches around the world. The sky was dark with unnatural clouds, and the water was churning with movement that had nothing to do with wind or current. Rodriguez and Sarah's pod bobbed on the surface about 200 yards away, its emergency beacon flashing in the stormlight. I activated my own beacon and tried to establish radio contact with the outside world. The first thing I heard was chaos. Emergency broadcasts from shipping lanes, coastal cities, naval bases. Reports of massive sea creatures breaching the surface, of tidal waves hitting coastlines, of communication systems failing worldwide. This is Emergency Broadcast Station WXK-47. A strained voice crackled through the static. All vessels are advised to avoid deep water. Repeat, all vessels avoid deep water. Reports of large marine animals attacking ships throughout the North Atlantic. Military vessels are responding. But, Jesus Christ, look at the size of that thing. The transmission cut off in a burst of static. I managed to raise Rodriguez on the short-range radio. Sarah's unconscious, he reported, but she's breathing. Your pod intact, functional. Any sign of rescue vessels? Negative. But Jake. Look toward the horizon. I looked southeast, toward where the coast of Scotland should have been visible on a clear day. Instead, I saw something that made me understand the full scope of what we'd unleashed. The ocean was rising, not temporarily, like a storm surge or tidal wave, but permanently, as if the water level of all the world's oceans was increasing. The deep ones aren't just reclaiming the surface, I realized. They're changing the entire planetary environment. The implications were staggering. If the ocean level was rising globally, coastal cities would be flooded. Low-lying countries would disappear entirely. Millions of people would be displaced or killed as the Guardians reshaped the world to suit their needs. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio again, tight with fear. Jake, something's coming up from below. I looked down through the clear bottom panel of my escape pod. Deep beneath us, lights were rising. Not the green-white glow of the individual Guardians, but something much larger and brighter. Something that illuminated the entire water column from the sea floor to just below our pods. It's one of the cities, I whispered into the radio. They're bringing the cities to the surface. The underwater city we'd escaped from was rising through the water column, its living architecture expanding and growing as it approached the new ocean surface level. But it wasn't just our city. Through the storm-darkened water, I could see other lights rising from other locations. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all across the North Sea and beyond. The deep ones weren't just sending individual Guardians to the surface. They were relocating their entire civilization from the ocean depths to the new water level they were creating. The surface world wasn't being invaded. It was being replaced. A massive shape broke the surface about a mile away. One of the living cities, its coral-like architecture now exposed to air and sunlight for the first time in geological ages. But instead of dying in the alien environment, the structures began to change, adapting to atmospheric conditions with the same fluid grace they'd shown underwater. Other cities breached the surface in the distance, creating a chain of new islands across what had been empty ocean. And from each city, smaller creatures were emerging, not the massive guardians, but things that were clearly designed for surface operations. Amphibious forms that could function both in water and air. They're building a new world. Sarah's voice came weakly over the radio. She'd regained consciousness and was staring at the transformed ocean around us, using the infrastructure they've been developing for thousands of years. The storm began to clear as the last of the cities reached their new positions on the elevated ocean surface. In the growing light, I could see that we were no longer floating on the North Sea as I'd known it. We were in the middle of an alien ocean, surrounded by impossible architecture, watching the birth of a civilization that had been waiting beneath our feet since before human history began. That's when I saw the rescue helicopter approaching from the south, a Royal Navy Sea King, struggling to maintain altitude in the turbulent air above the transformed ocean. As it got closer, I could see that it was damaged, probably from encounters with the flying creatures that were now emerging from the surface cities. "Emergency vessels, this is Royal Navy Rescue 147. The pilot's voice crackled over the emergency frequency, preparing for recovery operations. But even as the helicopter approached, I could see it was being followed, not by the massive guardians, but by smaller creatures that moved through the air with the same fluid coordination the deep ones had shown underwater. They weren't attacking the helicopter directly, just observing, learning about surface technology the same way they'd learned about our drilling equipment. The rescue operation was successful, but I knew it was also temporary. As the Sea King carried us toward what remained of the Scottish coast, I could see the scope of the transformation taking place across the entire planet. The ocean level had risen at least 200 feet, turning inland areas into shallow seas and creating new coastlines hundreds of miles from their original positions. But more importantly, I could see the Deep One's surface operations beginning in earnest. The amphibious creatures were establishing beachheads on the new coastlines, while the flying forms were conducting reconnaissance flights over the flooded interior regions. It was a coordinated invasion, but also something more. An evolutionary transition that would reshape not just human civilization, but the entire planetary ecosystem. The helicopter set us down at what had been RAF Lossiemouth, now a temporary island in the expanding North Sea. Emergency services were overwhelmed, trying to coordinate evacuations from flooded cities while simultaneously dealing with encounters with creatures that shouldn't have existed. I gave my report to a succession of military officers, government officials, and scientists. They listened with expressions that ranged from disbelief to horror as I described the underwater city, the transformed crew members, and the coordinated global emergence of the Deep Ones. "How long do we have?" asked Colonel Harrison, the senior military officer coordinating the regional response. According to Captain Larson, the first wave was just the Guardians establishing control of the ocean surface. I replied, "The real colonization phase comes next." "Colonization of what?" "Everything. The Deep Ones aren't just reclaiming the oceans. They're reshaping the entire planet to support their civilization. The rising water levels, the new cities, the amphibious and aerial creatures. It's all part of a plan they've been developing for geological ages." Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a marine biologist who'd been brought in to analyze the situation, leaned forward. "Morrison, what you're describing suggests intelligence and organization on a scale that shouldn't be possible for marine life." "They're not just marine life," I said. "They're something that was here before continental drift, before complex land-based ecosystems. They've been waiting beneath the ocean floor while surface species evolved, learning from us, preparing for their return. Sarah, who had been quietly listening to the debriefing, finally spoke up. The drill cores we analyzed showed mathematical patterns, geometric progressions, technological integration with biological systems. This isn't invasion by primitive sea creatures. This is a resumption of activity by the planet's original technological civilization. The implications were staggering. If the Deep Ones were the original inhabitants of Earth, then humanity wasn't facing an alien invasion. We were dealing with the return of the planet's rightful owners, equipped with millions of years of additional development and a complete understanding of how to manipulate planetary systems. "What are our options?" Colonel Harrison asked. I thought about the massive guardians I'd seen rising from the ocean trenches, the living cities that could adapt to any environment, the creatures that could function equally well in water, air, or the hybrid conditions they were creating. "Adaptation," I said finally. Captain Larson was right about one thing. Resistance will only cause unnecessary suffering. The Deep Ones have had millions of years to prepare for this moment. We've had a few hours to react. You're suggesting we surrender? I'm suggesting we negotiate. Try to find a way for both species to coexist on the transformed planet they're creating. I looked out the window at the flooded landscape where strange lights were beginning to appear under the water, because the alternative is extinction. 6 months later, I'm writing this account from New Atlantis, one of the surface cities the Deep Ones constructed on the elevated Atlantic shelf. The negotiations I suggested never happened. Humanity did what humans always do when faced with an existential threat. We fought back with everything we had. It wasn't enough. The nuclear weapons we deployed against the deep cities simply provided them with additional energy to accelerate their terraforming operations. The conventional forces we sent against their amphibious troops were neutralized by creatures that could function in environments where human equipment failed. And the deeper we struck into their oceanic territories, the more we awakened guardians that had been sleeping even deeper than the first wave. But the Deep Ones weren't interested in human extinction. They were interested in integration. The survivors of the surface wars weren't killed or enslaved. They were offered the same choice Captain Larson had offered me: transformation or adaptation to the new planetary conditions. I chose adaptation. Sarah chose transformation and now serves as a liaison between the surface survivors and the deep civilization. Her human intelligence enhanced with the vast knowledge networks the Deep Ones have maintained for millions of years. Rodriguez chose to remain in the flooded ruins of Edinburgh, leading a community of humans who are learning to live in the shallow sea that covers most of what used to be Scotland. The planet is unrecognizable now. Ocean levels have stabilized about 400 feet above their previous level, with only the highest mountain ranges remaining as traditional land masses. But the new world isn't the aquatic wasteland human survivors expected. The Deep Ones have created complex ecosystems that support both their own needs and the requirements of adapted surface species. Cities like New Atlantis serve as transition zones where humans can live while gradually adapting to the aquatic environment. Some choose biological modification, accepting the same kind of transformation that allowed our former crew members to survive at impossible depths. Others develop technological solutions, creating hybrid communities that combine human engineering with Deep One biotechnology. The hardest part for most survivors is accepting that this isn't a temporary crisis. The Deep Ones don't plan to restore the previous planetary conditions. This is the new Earth, designed and implemented by its original technological civilization after millions of years of careful planning. But if I'm honest, after 6 months of living in New Atlantis, I have to admit that their world has advantages over what we lost. The cities are beautiful in ways that human architecture never achieved, growing and adapting to their inhabitants' needs rather than forcing inhabitants to adapt to rigid structures. The technology integrates biological and mechanical systems so seamlessly that the distinction becomes meaningless. And the knowledge available through the Deep One's network spans geological ages of accumulated wisdom. Sometimes I stand on the observation deck of New Atlantis and look down at the lights of the deep cities far below, knowing that Sarah is down there learning things about the universe that human science never dreamed of. Other times I look up at the surface waters where Rodriguez's community has learned to farm kelp forests and raise fish in ways that provide abundance without ecological destruction. The children born in New Atlantis will never know the world I grew up in. For them, this hybrid aquatic civilization will be normal, the way things have always been. They'll swim as easily as they walk, communicate as readily with the Deep Ones as with other humans, and think of the ocean as home rather than as an alien environment. Maybe that's how evolution is supposed to work. Maybe resistance to change is just another form of extinction, and adaptation is the only real survival strategy. The Deep Ones waited millions of years for the right moment to reclaim their planet, and when that moment came, they were ready with plans and technologies that made resistance futile. But here's what I haven't told the other survivors, what I couldn't include in my official reports. Sometimes, late at night, when the city's bioluminescence dims to its sleeping cycle, I can hear sounds from the deeper waters, not the familiar voices of the Guardians or the mechanical sounds of the surface cities, but something else, something that makes the Deep Ones themselves seem small and temporary. The drilling operations that awakened the first level of their civilization only reached 8,000 feet below the seafloor. But I've seen the Deep One's excavation equipment working at depths that make our drilling technology look like children's toys. They're digging deeper, much deeper, into layers of the planet that have been sealed since the Earth first formed. And sometimes, just for a moment, I catch harmonics in the city's normal sounds that suggest we haven't seen the deepest level of what lives in this planet's core. The Deep Ones may have reclaimed the surface world, but they're still preparing for something else, something that makes their millions of years of planning seem like a brief preparation period. Whatever they're digging toward in the planet's deep places, it's been waiting even longer than they have, and when they finally break through to those ultimate depths, I have a feeling that both humanity and the Deep Ones will discover that we're all just temporary occupants of a world that belongs to something even more ancient and vast. But that's a story for another day. For now, I'm Jake Morrison, former drilling supervisor, current resident of New Atlantis, writing this account as a warning and a record for whoever might find it in the future. The Deep Ones rise when you drill too deep, but they're not the deepest things sleeping in the Earth's hidden places. If you're reading this, if you're planning deep excavation or drilling operations, remember that some things are buried for very good reasons, and sometimes the best way to survive discovery is to make sure you never go looking in the first place. The ocean remembers everything, and some memories are better left undisturbed. But if you do happen to drill into something that shouldn't exist, something that breathes in mathematical rhythms and builds cities from living architecture, well, try to adapt. Because resistance, as I learned the hard way, only makes the transition more difficult. The Deep Ones are patient, but they're not the most patient things waiting in the dark places of the world. And if you hear sounds from even deeper waters, sounds that make ancient civilizations seem young and temporary, don't investigate. Some knowledge is too dangerous for any species to possess, no matter how long they've been planning for their moment of awakening. Sweet dreams.